The mahogany-paneled office of Arthur Pendleton, Esquire, smelled of lemon polish and old money. Leather chairs lined the walls like sentinels guarding secrets. Rebecca Harris sat in the back corner, acutely aware of the frayed cuffs on her cardigan, the scuff marks on her only pair of work flats. Her three children squeezed onto the chair beside her, Emily pressed against the armrest, 7 years old and too observant for her own good. Jacob tucked in the middle at 6, his sneakers swinging above the Persian rug. Ryan curled in Rebecca's lap, at 5, thumb hovering near his mouth, the way it always did when strangers filled a room. The Whitmores occupied the front rows. Pamela sat rigid in Chanel, her diamond tennis bracelet catching light every time she adjusted her designer handbag. Christopher sprawled in his seat like he owned the building's silk tie, loosened just enough to suggest casual wealth. Three other cousins Rebecca barely knew filled the remaining chairs, all of them smelling of expensive cologne and entitlement. Arthur Pendleton adjusted his reading glasses and cleared his throat. The rustling of silk and tailored wool settled into expectant silence. He opened the thick leather folder containing Kathleen Bennett's last will and testament. The reading began with the standard preamble: sound mind, last wishes, lawful execution. Rebecca's attention drifted to the oil painting behind Pendleton's desk, some ancestor in riding clothes, probably judging them all from beyond the grave. Emily's small hand found hers and squeezed. The girl always knew when her mother's mind wandered. Pendleton's voice sharpened. To my niece Pamela Whitmore, I leave the sum of $4.5 million and the liquid assets held in the Cayman accounts. Pamela's lips curved into a tight, satisfied smile. She didn't look at Rebecca. Nobody ever looked at Rebecca.
To my great-nephew, Christopher Whitmore, I leave the majority shares of Whitmore Logistics, along with the penthouse in Manhattan, valued at approximately $3.2 million. Christopher smirked and pulled out his phone fingers, already dancing across the screen, probably texting his girlfriend about the windfall. Jacob leaned forward, fascinated by the grown man's rudeness. Pendleton flipped to the final page. His eyes flickered over the rim of his glasses toward the back corner. The pause stretched 3 seconds too long. And, to my great-niece Rebecca Harris, I leave the entirety of the estate located at 42 Hawthorne Lane, including the house, the land, and all its physical contents. Silence crashed through the room like a wave breaking against rocks. Then Christopher's laughter erupted loud and unapologetic. He slapped his knee, wiping his eyes. The Hawthorne house! You've got to be kidding me! Pamela's voice cut through the room, sharp as broken glass. Arthur, surely there's a mistake. That property has been condemned by the city twice. Kathleen was a notorious hoarder. The land isn't even worth the cost of demolition. Pendleton's expression remained neutral, professionally blank. There is no mistake. The property and all its contents belong to Rebecca. Rebecca's stomach plummeted. She'd come because Kathleen was the only relative who'd sent birthday cards, the only one who'd called when Rebecca's mother passed away 2 years ago, leaving Rebecca drowning in a mountain of medical debt. She'd secretly hoped for enough to pay off the bank, maybe enough to save her struggling freelance graphic design business. Instead, she'd just inherited a monumental liability. The Whitmores filed out of the office, eager to celebrate their windfalls at whatever restaurant charged $50 for an appetizer. Christopher paused by Rebecca's chair. He smelled of acqua di gio and self-satisfaction. "Hey, Rebecca." The way he drawled her name made it sound like an insult. "If you need to borrow a dumpster,
Let me know. I hear hazmat suits are on sale at Home Depot. Enjoy the rat droppings." Emily's hand tightened around Rebecca's fingers. The little girl's eyes welled up, not understanding the words, but recognizing the cruelty in Christopher's tone. Jacob's face flushed red. Ryan buried his face in Rebecca's neck. Rebecca forced her voice steady. "Thank you for the offer, Christopher. We'll manage." He grinned and strolled out, already on his phone again. The drive from Portland's financial district to the outskirts took 40 minutes in good traffic. Rebecca's 2010 Honda Civic sputtered and wheezed, the air conditioning broken since last summer. Late afternoon heat pressed through the windows. In the back seat, Emily had opened her library book, some story about a girl who discovered a magical garden. She read aloud to her brothers, doing different voices for each character, trying to keep them entertained. Jacob interrupted every few pages with questions. Why doesn't the girl just tell her uncle about the garden? Emily sighed with the exasperation of someone far older than 7. Because then it wouldn't be a secret dummy. "Don't call your brother names," Rebecca murmured, eyes on the winding road. The GPS indicated another 15 minutes. Trees grew denser here, crowding the asphalt like they wanted to reclaim the land. Ryan had fallen asleep, head lolling against the car seat mouth, slightly open. His Batman t-shirt was wrinkled and stained from lunch. Rebecca hadn't had time to do laundry in 3 days. Between client deadlines and keeping 3 kids fed and clothed, something always slipped through the cracks. The bank had called this morning. Again. She'd let it go to voicemail. Again. The voice was always the same, professionally pleasant, asking her to call back regarding her account. They never said the word overdrawn in the messages, but Rebecca knew. $89 left in checking. The next freelance payment wouldn't clear for another week, if it cleared at all. The client had been dodgy about the final revisions. Emily closed her book as the GPS announced their arrival. The Civic crunched over gravel weeds, scraping the undercarriage. 42 Hawthorne Lane loomed ahead like something out of a Gothic nightmare. The Victorian mansion stood 3 stories tall, its gray clapboard siding peeling in long, diseased strips. Blackened ivy choked the walls, creeping through broken shutters and cracked windows. The wraparound porch sagged dangerously, its floorboards rotting into the damp earth. Several windows were boarded up. Others stared down at them, opaque with decades of grime, like dead eyes in a corpse's face. Emily's voice came out small and frightened. "It looks like a haunted house." Jacob pressed his face to the window, eyes wide. "Cool. It's like an adventure house." Ryan stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. He took one look at the mansion, and his lower lip trembled. "I want to go home." Rebecca killed the engine. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. No birds sang in the overgrown trees. No wind rustled through the knee-high grass. Just stillness, like the property was holding its breath. She forced brightness into her voice. "It's not so bad. We're just going to look around today. Okay, just a quick peek inside." The front door was solid oak, the kind they didn't make anymore. The key Pendleton had given her turned in the lock with a grinding protest. The door swung inward on rusted hinges, releasing a smell that hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Mildew, mothballs, decaying paper, something else underneath, feral and sharp. Cat urine, maybe, or worse. Emily gagged and stepped back. Jacob covered his nose with his shirt. Ryan started crying, reaching for Rebecca to be picked up. Rebecca stood on the threshold, staring into the gloom. Floor-to-ceiling stacks of yellowed newspapers created a terrifying maze through the grand foyer. Antique furniture was piled haphazardly, covered in moth-eaten sheets that hung like burial shrouds. Cardboard boxes spilled over with rusted kitchen utensils, broken porcelain dolls with missing eyes, tangled webs of tarnished costume jewelry. Everything was coated in dust, so thick it looked like gray snow. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Oh, Aunt Kathleen, what did you do?" Over the next 3 weeks, Rebecca's life became an exhausting, solitary hell. She woke at 6 every morning in the cramped studio apartment. She could barely afford made breakfast for 3 restless children and drove them across town to Shirley Morrison's house. The old woman lived 2 streets over from Hawthorne Lane and had known Kathleen years ago, back before the hoarding consumed everything. Shirley asked for nothing in return for watching the kids. Just company, she said. Someone to remind her that kindness still existed in a world that had forgotten how to be gentle. By 8, Rebecca was hauling trash bags to the curb, 40, 50, 60 bags a day, black contractor bags stuffed with newspapers from 1987 magazines from the 70s, receipts from stores that didn't exist anymore. Her hands blistered within the first week. By the week 2, calluses formed hard and painful. She wore through 3 pairs of work gloves. The dust triggered coughing fits that left her bent double gasping. She bought a respirator mask from the hardware store, adding another expense to the credit card balance that climbed higher every day. The mask helped with breathing, but did nothing for the heat. The mansion had no working air conditioning, and August in Maine felt like being slowly baked alive. Every evening at 6:30, Rebecca picked up her children from Shirley's house. Emily always greeted her with a hug and a drawing stick figures of their family, sometimes with a dog Rebecca couldn't afford. Jacob would launch into detailed explanations of whatever game he'd invented that day, usually involving dragons or space pirates. Ryan just wanted to be held his small arms wrapping around Rebecca's neck like he feared she might disappear if he let go. She'd drive them back to the apartment, make dinner from whatever was left in the cupboard, pasta again, or rice and canned vegetables. Then baths. Stories bedtime. Jacob always asked when they'd move into the big house. Emily always reminded him it wasn't ready yet. Ryan just asked when things would go back to normal. By 9 o'clock, with all 3 children asleep in the apartment's only bedroom, while Rebecca camped on the couch, she'd open her laptop and work on whatever freelance projects she could squeeze in. Logo designs, website mock-ups, branding packages for startups that paid half what they should. Her eyes would blur around midnight, her back screaming from the day's manual labor and the evening hunched over a screen. She'd collapse around 1 or 2 in the morning, knowing the alarm would shriek at 6. The cycle repeated, day after day, week after week. Pamela visited once, pulling up in her silver Mercedes on a gray Tuesday afternoon. She didn't step out of the car, just rolled down the window enough to be heard over the engine. Rebecca stood in the overgrown yard, dirt streaked across her face, her T-shirt soaked with sweat. She'd been hauling a broken dresser to the curb when the Mercedes appeared like a vision from another world. Pamela's voice dripped with distaste. "Rebecca, darling, this is embarrassing for the family. I'll offer you $10,000 for the deed. I'll bulldoze it and put up townhomes. Save yourself this pathetic display." $10,000 wouldn't even cover half her mother's hospital bills. The bank held debts that would take a decade to clear. But Rebecca felt something brittle and sharp flare in her chest. Pride, maybe, or just pure stubbornness. "No, thank you, Pamela. I'll manage." Pamela simply rolled up the window and drove away, shaking her head like Rebecca was a lost cause. The Mercedes disappeared down the tree-lined street, leaving Rebecca alone with her exhaustion and her rapidly dwindling options. On the afternoon of the 17th day, Rebecca finally breached the library. The other rooms had been filled with garbage, actual trash, mixed with occasional antiques that might be worth something if she could find a buyer. But the library was different. Rain lashed against the cracked window panes, casting wavering shadows across the room. Unlike the rest of the house, the library wasn't packed with refuse. Instead, it held heavy iron-clamped trunks and towering mahogany bookshelves that groaned under the weight of thousands of leather-bound volumes. The air here smelled of old paper and something else, a faint metallic tang Rebecca couldn't quite place. She collapsed into a velvet armchair that released a cloud of dust. Her respirator mask hung around her neck. She took a long drink from a lukewarm water bottle, wincing as it hit her empty stomach. She'd skipped lunch. Again. Too much to do, too little time. Beside the chair sat a stack of documents she'd found in a locked roll-top desk upstairs. Among them, the original 1912 architectural blueprint of the Hawthorne property. Rebecca unrolled the brittle blue-tinted paper using a brass candlestick and a dusty snow globe to weigh down the corners. She traced the lines with a dirt-crusted fingernail, mentally checking off the rooms she'd cleared. Foyer, drawing room, dining room, kitchen, scullery. Her fingers stopped on the library. According to the blueprint, the library measured exactly 30 feet long by 20 feet deep, a massive rectangular room. Rebecca looked up from the paper, scanning the space. The heavy double doors stood at one end. The far wall was entirely consumed by a massive floor-to-ceiling bookcase, ornately carved mahogany that looked like it belonged in a museum. She stood fatigue momentarily forgotten. Walking to the far wall, she paced off the depth of the room, heel to toe. 1, 2, 3. She counted aloud, her voice echoing in the empty space. She stopped at 15 feet. Her toes bumped against the bottom trim of the giant bookcase. Rebecca frowned, turning around. Maybe her pacing was off. She rummaged through her toolbox, pulled out a yellow metal tape measure, and hooked it to the doorframe. Walking it across the scuffed hardwood floor, she extended the tape until it hit the bookcase. 15 feet. Exactly. Her heart began to beat faster, a strange electricity crawling up her spine. 5 entire feet of the house were missing, not a minor architectural quirk. 5 feet across a 30-foot wide room was massive, 150 square feet of space that existed on paper but not in reality. Rebecca approached the colossal bookcase. It was gorgeous craftsmanship, though, covered in decades of grime. Hundreds of encyclopedias, dusty atlases, and crumbling romantic novels filled the shelves. She pressed her palms flat against the wood between the shelves. It felt solid, unyielding. "Come on!" The words barely escaped her lips. "What are you hiding?" She began pulling books off the shelves, tossing them carelessly onto the floor in a rising cloud of dust. First one shelf, then another. As she cleared the middle section at eye level, she noticed something odd. The wood paneling behind the books wasn't continuous. There was a faint, almost imperceptible, vertical seam running down the center. Rebecca ran her fingers along the seam. It was tight, perfectly fitted. She tapped the wood to the left of the seam. Thud, thud, solid. She tapped to the right. Thack, thack, hollow. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She searched the empty shelves desperately for a lever, a button, anything. She twisted decorative wooden rosettes. Nothing. She pulled on shelving brackets. Nothing. Frustrated, she stepped back. Her foot kicked one of the books she'd thrown to the floor, a heavy leather-bound copy of Dante's Inferno. It had fallen open, and tucked inside the pages was a small rusted iron key and a folded piece of thick cardstock. Rebecca knelt, hands shaking, as she picked up the cardstock. In elegant spider-web handwriting, a single phrase was written: "The world sees only the surface. You must pull the roots." She stared at the note, then looked back at the bookcase. Pull the roots. Her eyes dropped to the bottom of the structure where ornate wooden trim met the floor. The trim was heavily carved with intricate patterns of vines and roots, the kind of detail that took master craftsmen months to complete. She grabbed the thickest carved root on the right side of the baseboard. She pulled. It didn't budge. She wrapped both hands around it, planted her boots against the floorboards, and yanked with all the strength left in her exhausted body. With a sickening crack of breaking dust and ancient grease, the wooden root slid outward by about 3 inches. Deep within the walls, something heavy and metallic groaned to life. A series of mechanical clicks echoed through the quiet room, sounding like a massive clock winding up. Rebecca scrambled backward, heart in her throat. Suddenly, the entire right half of the mahogany bookcase shifted forward. The massive wooden structure swung outward on hidden heavy-duty steel hinges, revealing what lay behind it. Standing in the 5-foot gap between the false bookcase and the true exterior wall of the house was a door, but nothing like the Victorian architecture surrounding it. This was a vault door, solid brushed steel, resembling something from a high-security bank. In the center sat a heavy iron wheel and a complex, antique combination dial. Directly below the dial was a keyhole. Rebecca looked down at the rusted iron key in her trembling hand. She stepped into the narrow, claustrophobic gap. The air here was freezing, carrying that same metallic tang she'd noticed earlier, but stronger now. She inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, but when she tried to turn it, nothing happened. It needed the combination. She frantically pulled the cardstock from her pocket and turned it over. On the back, written faintly in pencil, were 4 numbers, 1944. Rebecca's hands shook so violently she almost couldn't grip the brass dial. She spun it right to 1 left, to 9 right, to 4 left, to 4. She grabbed the iron key and twisted. A heavy, satisfying thunk reverberated from deep inside the steel door. Taking a breath that felt like swallowing glass, Rebecca gripped the iron wheel and pulled. The vault door, despite its immense weight, swung open silently on perfectly oiled hinges. Total darkness waited inside. Rebecca grabbed the heavy-duty maglite from her tool belt and clicked it on. She swept the beam of light into the abyss. The light caught something reflecting a brilliant, blinding flash of gold back into her eyes. Then it hit something else, a flash of crimson, a sparkle of diamonds, the unmistakable texture of masterfully painted canvas. Rebecca gasped. Her grip faltered. The maglite slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the concrete floor. Even in the dim, rolling light from the fallen flashlight, she could see it. The entire family had mocked her for inheriting a house full of garbage. But as Rebecca Harris stared into the cavernous, climate-controlled vault, hidden beneath the rotting floorboards of Hawthorne Lane, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. Kathleen Bennett hadn't been a crazy hoarder at all. She'd been a guardian. Rebecca retrieved the maglite with trembling hands, and as she lifted the beam of light, The sheer scale of the hidden room revealed itself. This was a subterranean bunker encased in thick concrete and fortified steel, completely detached from the rotting Victorian structure above it. The air was crisp, managed by a silent state-of-the-art climate control system hidden behind ventilation grates. Someone had maintained this recently. She stepped inside. The heavy steel door stood open behind her like the mouth of a dormant beast. Her boots echoed on the concrete floor. Lining the left wall were rows of reinforced steel shelving supporting dozens of wooden crates. Some were pried open, revealing rows of dull, heavy ingots. Rebecca approached one, running a dusty finger over the cold metal. Even in the dim light, she recognized the unmistakable weight and luster of solid gold bullion. Stamped into the surface of the top bar was a faded chilling insignia, a stark eagle clutching a wreath, accompanied by the year 1943. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just gold, this was plunder, stolen, Nazi gold. She turned the flashlight toward the center of the room. Here, resting on custom-built mahogany easels, were canvases draped in velvet dropcloths. Rebecca reached out her heart, hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and pulled back the closest cloth. She stumbled backward, hand flying to her mouth. Staring back at her was a masterpiece she'd only seen in college, art history textbooks, a painting that had been presumed destroyed for nearly 80 years. Raphael's portrait of a young man, stolen from the Czartoryski Museum in Poland during the darkest days of the Second World War. Beside it sat a breathtakingly intricate jeweled egg, sparkling with diamonds and deep blue enamel, bearing the unmistakable hallmark of the House of Fabergé. Rebecca's legs gave out. She collapsed onto her knees on the cold concrete, the maglite beam wavering across priceless artifacts that weren't supposed to exist anymore. At the far end of the bunker sat a simple, sturdy oak desk. On it rested a brass banker's lamp, a magnifying glass, and a thick leather-bound ledger. Next to the ledger was a sealed envelope with Rebecca's name written on it in Kathleen's elegant script. Rebecca crawled to the desk, no longer trusting her legs. She clicked on the banker's lamp, amazed that the bunker's independent power grid was still functioning. She tore open the envelope with shaking fingers. The letter was written on heavy cream stationery, the ink slightly faded, but still legible. My dearest Rebecca, if you are reading this, my labyrinth has served its purpose, and you have proven yourself to be the only person with the tenacity and courage to look beneath the surface of things. For 40 years, they called me a lunatic. They called me a pathetic hoarder. It was the greatest performance of my life. I was never crazy, Rebecca. I was a sentinel. During the war, long before I became the eccentric spinster of Hawthorne Lane, I worked for the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services in Europe. My unit tracked stolen cultural artifacts, working alongside men and women who risked everything to save history from the fires of tyranny. We found caches of stolen art in salt mines, castles, and abandoned trains. But my greatest enemy was not a foreign soldier. It was my own brother, your great-grandfather, Richard Bennett. Richard was a war profiteer. He used the family's shipping routes to smuggle stolen European assets out of Nazi hands and into his own pockets. Gold, priceless art, jewels stripped from innocent families before they were murdered. He laundered the proceeds to build the Whitmore Empire. The wealth your cousins flaunt today is entirely built on blood and theft. In 1945, I discovered his final massive shipment headed for the black market. With the help of a few trusted operatives, I diverted the cargo to this bunker, which I had secretly commissioned beneath the old family estate. When Richard realized what I had done, he threatened to kill me, but I threatened to expose him to the Allied tribunals. We reached a stalemate. He left me alone, and I spent the rest of my life guarding the evidence, burying the house in refuse. So no thief nor any greedy Whitmore would ever want to step foot inside. I could not return these items during my lifetime. Richard's political connections were too deep, and he would have intercepted them. But times have changed. The men who protected him are dead. Now I leave this burden and this power to you. The ledger on this desk contains every shipping manifest, every bribe, every illicit transaction Richard ever made. Dates, bank accounts, names, everything. The family mocked you, Rebecca. They left you to drown in debt while they summered in the Hamptons and toasted their fortunes with champagne that cost more than your monthly rent. Now it is your turn to rewrite the legacy, repatriate the art, return the gold to its rightful owners. Use the truth to take back your life. You are stronger than they ever gave you credit for. You are braver than you know. And you are the only one I could trust with this. With all my love and faith, Aunt Kathleen. Rebecca sat in the leather desk chair, the letter trembling in her hands. For several minutes she couldn't move, couldn't think. The words swam before her eyes, rearranging themselves into a new reality. The mocking texts from Christopher, Pamela's condescending offer of $10,000. The years of financial struggle while the Whitmores summered in Martha's Vineyard and bought second homes in Aspen. It all crystallized into a sharp, terrifying clarity. They weren't just arrogant. Their entire existence was a fraud. She opened the heavy leather ledger. The ink was faded in places, but the meticulous records were damning. Names, dates, Swiss bank account numbers, explicit descriptions of smuggled Nazi plunder, page after page after page of evidence spanning from 1943 to 1967, when Richard Bennett finally died and the shipment stopped. It was a ticking time bomb, and Rebecca had her finger on the detonator. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. No signal down here. Of course not the concrete and steel encased the bunker like a tomb. She'd have to go upstairs. She'd have to call someone, FBI maybe, or a lawyer, or Kenneth Blake, the retired detective whose business card she'd found among Kathleen's papers upstairs, with a handwritten note on the back. If you need help, call Kenneth. He knows everything. But first, she needed to document this, all of it. Rebecca spent the next hour using her phone's camera to photograph every page of the ledger, every gold bar, every painting. Her hands steadied as she worked the initial shock, giving way to something else, a cold, focused determination she'd never felt before. The trapdoor at the top of her mother's medical bills had just opened. The answer to every sleepless night, every rejected freelance bid, every time she'd had to tell Emily they couldn't afford new shoes, it was all here, hidden behind a false wall in a house everyone thought was worthless. But as Rebecca photographed the final page of the ledger, Kathleen's words echoed in her mind. Repatriate the art, return the gold to its rightful owners. This wasn't her treasure to keep. It belonged to families who'd been murdered, to museums that had spent decades searching, to survivors who thought these pieces of their heritage were lost forever. Rebecca thought about her 3 children asleep right now in Shirley Morrison's guest room because Rebecca had texted saying she'd be working late. She thought about Emily's drawings, Jacob's endless questions, Ryan's need to be held. She thought about the apartment they were about to be evicted from, the medical bills crushing her into bankruptcy. This gold could solve everything. These paintings could sell for millions, but they weren't hers. The realization hit her like cold water. Kathleen had left her the most valuable thing of all. Not wealth, but the power to choose, the power to do what Richard Bennett never did, the power to make things right. Rebecca closed the ledger and picked up the letter again, reading the final lines. "You are stronger than they ever gave you credit for. You are braver than you know." She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her pocket. Then she turned off the banker's lamp, grabbed the maglite, and walked out of the vault. The steel door swung shut behind her with a heavy final click. She locked it with the key and pocketed that too. Pulling the carved wooden root back into place, she heard the mechanical gears grind as the bookcase swung closed, sealing the vault behind layers of mahogany and Victorian facade. Rebecca stood in the library, surrounded by the books she'd scattered across the floor. Rain still lashed the windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Her phone buzzed in her pocket signal, restored now that she was above ground. A text from Shirley. "Kids asking when you're coming. I told them soon. They're eating ice cream and watching a movie. Take your time, dear." Another text, this one from the bank. "Your account is overdrawn. Please contact us immediately." And a third from Christopher, sent 3 hours ago. "Heard you're still playing in the garbage heap. Let me know when you're ready to sell. My offer stands at $5,000. Final price." Rebecca looked at Christopher's message for a long moment. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled to Kenneth Blake's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Outside, lightning split the sky. Thunder followed 3 seconds later, shaking the windows in their frames. Rebecca pressed call. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a gravelly voice answered. "Kenneth Blake." Rebecca took a breath. "Mr.
Blake, my name is Rebecca Harris. Kathleen Bennett was my aunt. She left me a note saying you could help me. I need to report a crime."
A pause. Then carefully, "What kind of crime, Ms. Harris?" Rebecca looked at the bookcase, hiding the vault, at the scattered books on the floor, at the blueprint still spread across the chair, showing the 5 missing feet. "War crimes, theft, money laundering, spanning 80 years. Her voice steadied, growing stronger with each word. "And I have all the evidence." Another pause, longer this time. She heard papers rustling on the other end of the line. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't touch anything else. Don't call anyone else. And Ms. Harris." "Yes." "Kathleen told me about you. She said when the time came, you'd do the right thing." His voice softened just slightly. "I'm glad she was right." The line went dead. Rebecca stood in the library as rain hammered the roof and wind howled through the broken shutters. She thought about Pamela in her Mercedes, about Christopher with his smirk and his Instagram followers, about all the Whitmores who'd built their lives on stolen gold and murdered families. She thought about 3 kids eating ice cream at Shirley Morrison's house, unaware that their mother had just found something that would change everything. And she thought about Kathleen Bennett, spending 40 years buried alive in garbage, guarding secrets that could destroy empires, waiting for someone brave enough to pull the roots. Rebecca walked to the window and looked out at the overgrown yard, at the 2010 Honda Civic sitting in the driveway with its broken air conditioning and its check engine light that had been on for 6 months. In exactly 20 minutes, Kenneth Blake would arrive. In exactly 20 minutes, the trajectory of her life would shift permanently. The Whitmores would learn what it felt like to lose everything. And the families who'd had everything stolen would finally get a piece of their history back. But right now, in this moment, standing in a library in a house everyone thought was garbage, Rebecca Harris, allowed herself one truth. Sometimes the things that look most broken hold the strongest foundations. She picked up her phone and texted Shirley, "On my way home, thank you for everything. Tell the kids I love them." Then she turned off the maglite, left the library, and walked out into the storm to wait for the man who would help her tear down a dynasty built on bones. The rain soaked through her shirt within seconds. She didn't care. For the first time in 2 years, maybe in her entire life, Rebecca Harris wasn't afraid anymore. Kenneth Blake arrived in 19 minutes, not 20. His truck was a battered Ford F-150 with rust eating through the wheel wells. Nothing like the luxury vehicles Rebecca associated with anyone connected to the Whitmores. He stepped out into the rain wearing a worn leather jacket and work boots, gray hair plastered to his skull. 58 years old and moving like a man who'd spent decades on his feet chasing leads that didn't want to be found. Rebecca met him on the sagging porch, rain dripping from her hair. She'd locked the library door behind her, the key to the vault burning a hole in her jeans pocket. Blake's eyes swept over her, once taking in the exhaustion, the dirt-streaked clothes, the blistered hands. "You look like hell." "I've been sorting through 40 years of camouflage." He nodded, understanding flickering across weathered features. "Kathleen was good at that, building walls people couldn't see through." He pulled a waterproof folder from inside his jacket. "Before we go inside, I need you to understand something. What you're about to do exposing the Whitmores, it won't be clean. It won't be quick. These people have money lawyers' connections that go back generations. They will fight you with everything they have." Rebecca thought about Emily, asking when they could afford new shoes. Jacob's school field trip permission slip she couldn't sign because the fee was $30 she didn't have. Ryan's stuffed rabbit with the ear falling off because she couldn't afford the $5 sewing kit to fix it properly. "I don't care how hard they fight." Blake studied her for another long moment, then smiled a thin, sharp expression that held no warmth. "Kathleen said you'd say that. She also said you'd need help. That's why I'm here." He gestured toward the door. "Show me." The walk through the library felt different with Blake beside her. He moved carefully, professionally, noting the scattered books, the blueprint still spread across the chair. When Rebecca pulled the carved root and the bookcase swung open, revealing the steel vault door, Blake's expression didn't change. He'd expected this. Kathleen had told him. Rebecca unlocked the vault with the key and the combination. The door swung open on those perfectly oiled hinges, and Blake stepped inside like he was entering a cathedral. He moved through the space methodically, examining each gold bar, each painting the ledger on the desk. His hands never touched anything, just looked cataloged, processed. When he finally turned back to Rebecca, his face was carved from stone. "Do you understand what you have here? Evidence of war crimes, theft, 80 years of it." "More than that." Blake moved to the desk, gesturing at the ledger. "This is a roadmap. Every transaction Richard Bennett made is documented. Bank accounts, shipping routes, bribes paid to customs officials, politicians, judges. If we do this right, we don't just expose the Whitmores. We dismantle the entire infrastructure that let them operate." He paused. "But we need to be smart. We need copies of everything before we contact the FBI. We need leverage." Rebecca pulled out her phone. "I already photographed the ledger, every page, and the gold bars, the paintings, everything." Blake's eyebrows rose a fraction. You've been busy. I have 3 kids sleeping at a neighbor's house and a bank account with $89 in it. I don't have time to be anything but busy. Something shifted in Blake's expression, respect maybe, or recognition. Kathleen was right about you. You're not just brave, you're practical. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket and handed it to her. Use this for anything related to this case. The Whitmores will monitor your regular phone once they realize what's happening. Keep this one charged and with you always. Rebecca took the phone, the cheap plastic cold against her palm. When do we contact the FBI? 48 hours. I have a contact in the art crime team, Robert Miller. Good man. Incorruptible, which is rare these days. But before we bring him in, we need to document everything to a level that will hold up in federal court. Photos aren't enough. We need measurements, detailed descriptions, provenance research on each piece. Blake checked his watch. It's 9:30 now. Can you be here tomorrow morning at 6? Rebecca thought about her 3 children, about the freelance deadlines piling up, about the apartment she was about to lose. Yes, bring work clothes and food. We're going to be here all day. Blake headed toward the vault door, then stopped. One more thing. Don't tell anyone about this. Not friends, not family, not the neighbor watching your kids. The fewer people who know, the safer you are. The words sent ice down Rebecca's spine. You think I'm in danger? Blake's face was grim. The Whitmores built an empire on blood money. You're about to tear it down. What do you think? The next 48 hours blurred into an exhausting, exhilarating nightmare. Rebecca dropped the kids at Shirley's at 5:30 each morning, mumbling explanations about extra work at the house, promising she'd explain everything soon. Emily's eyes were too knowing, too worried, but the little girl just hugged her mother and told Jacob and Ryan to be good. Blake arrived at 6 both mornings with coffee and breakfast sandwiches from a gas station. They worked in the vault until Rebecca had to leave at 6 each evening, documenting every single item. Blake brought a professional camera with a macro lens, photographing each gold bar's stamp, each painting's signature, each page of the ledgers in high resolution. Rebecca measured, described, took notes in a composition notebook Blake provided. The ledger was worse than she'd imagined. Richard Bennett hadn't just smuggled art and gold. He'd trafficked in everything the Nazis stole. Jewelry torn from necks before their owners were loaded onto trains. Silver candlesticks that had graced Sabbath tables for generations. Torah scrolls wrapped in velvet that had survived centuries only to be plundered in a single afternoon. One entry made Rebecca stop breathing for a full 10 seconds. April 17th, 1944. Shipment from Budapest. Contents 47 gold bars. Original Hungarian National Bank, 23 paintings. Various artists. See attached. Manifest. 156 pieces. Jewelry estate. Liquidation. Weiss family. Payment received $340,000 US deposited. Credit Suisse account number 4472-B. The Weiss family. Rebecca knew that name from history books. A prominent Jewish family in Hungary, industrialists who'd employed thousands before the Nazis arrived. The entire family had been murdered in Auschwitz. She showed Blake the entry. He photographed it, made notes, didn't comment, but his jaw was tight, his movements more controlled than usual. On the second afternoon, while Blake was upstairs making a phone call to his FBI contact, Rebecca found a photograph tucked into the back of the ledger, black and white, the edges yellowed with age. A young woman in a military uniform stood next to a tall man in an OSS jacket. The woman was Kathleen Rebecca, recognized her from old family photos. Beautiful, fierce, maybe 25 years old. The man beside her had his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at whoever held the camera. On the back, in Kathleen's handwriting, Vienna, May 1945, Captain James Morrison and me, the day we found the first cache. Rebecca stared at the photo, seeing her great-aunt in a way she'd never imagined. Not the eccentric old woman who'd lived alone in a garbage-filled house, but a soldier, a hero, someone who'd risked everything for something bigger than herself. Blake returned and saw the photo in Rebecca's hands. James Morrison was killed 3 weeks after that was taken. Murdered by black market smugglers in Prague. His voice was flat, emotionless. Kathleen spent the rest of her life making sure his death meant something. Rebecca carefully placed the photo back in the ledger. Did you know her well? I was a beat cop when we first met. She came to me with evidence of a local politician taking bribes from a development company. This was 30 years ago. I was young, stupid, thought I could change the world by following the rules. Blake's laugh was bitter. The politician walked. The development company doubled in size. And Kathleen taught me that sometimes the only way to get justice is to build your case so thoroughly that no amount of money or influence can knock it down. The burner phone in Rebecca's pocket vibrated. A text from Blake's FBI contact. Can meet Thursday, 7 a.m. Location TBD. Confirm your evidence is solid. Blake typed a response. Evidence is ironclad. See you Thursday. Thursday morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind of dense Maine mist that turned the world into a grayscale painting. Rebecca had barely slept. She'd spent Wednesday night with her children making pancakes for dinner because there wasn't much else in the cupboard, reading stories until Ryan fell asleep mid-page. Emily had asked if everything was okay. Rebecca had lied and said yes. The guilt sat heavy in her chest. At 5:30 Thursday morning, Rebecca kissed her sleeping children goodbye and drove to Hawthorne Lane. Blake was already there, along with a man she didn't recognize, mid-40s African-American, wearing a dark suit that looked government issue. He had kind eyes and a firm handshake. Robert Miller, FBI Art Crime Team. His voice was steady, professional. Kenneth tells me you found something significant. Rebecca led them to the vault. Miller's composure cracked when he saw the gold bars, the paintings, the jeweled Fabergé egg sitting on its mahogany easel like a crown jewel in a forgotten kingdom. He spent 2 hours examining everything while Blake and Rebecca waited in the library. When Miller finally emerged, his face was ashen. Ms. Harris, do you understand the magnitude of what you have here? War crimes, theft, money laundering. Miller pulled out a small notebook, flipped through pages covered in tight handwriting. That Raphael has been on the FBI's top 10 missing art list since 1946. The Fabergé egg belongs to a collection we thought was lost when the Nazis invaded Poland. These gold bars, he gestured back toward the vault, they bear stamps from at least 6 different European national banks. This is the largest cache of recovered Nazi plunder found in the United States in 50 years. Rebecca's legs felt weak. What happens now? Now we secure the scene, bring in a full evidence team, and start building a case against anyone connected to these items. Miller's eyes were sharp, calculating. Kenneth told me about the Whitmores, about the ledger. I need to see it. Rebecca handed over the composition notebook containing her transcribed notes along with Blake's high-resolution photos of each ledger page. Miller read in silence for 10 minutes, his expression growing darker with each page. When he looked up, his voice was cold. "The Whitmores are going down, I promise you that. But, Miss Harris, I need to be clear, this is going to get ugly. They'll hire lawyers who cost more per hour than you make in a month. They'll drag your name through the mud, question your motives, paint you as a gold digger, trying to steal from your own family. Can you handle that?" Rebecca thought about Christopher's smirk in the lawyer's office, about Pamela rolling up her window and driving away in her Mercedes. She thought about her mother's medical bills, about choosing between electricity and groceries, about every night she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering how she'd keep her children fed. "They already think I'm garbage. They can't make me feel smaller than I already do." Miller smiled for the first time, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Then let's make sure justice gets served." The FBI moved faster than Rebecca expected. By Friday afternoon, they had agents stationed around the property, evidence technicians photographing every inch of the vault, forensic accountants beginning the work of tracing the ledger's transactions through decades of banking records. Rebecca went home Friday night and told Shirley Morrison she might need to watch the kids for longer hours, possibly weeks. Shirley, bless her, asked no questions, just squeezed Rebecca's hand and said she'd keep them safe and happy. But Rebecca's phone, her regular phone, not the burner, started ringing Saturday morning. Christopher's number appeared first, then Pamela's, then numbers she didn't recognize. She let them all go to voicemail. The messages started polite, asking her to call back regarding family business. By Saturday afternoon, they'd turned demanding. By Sunday morning, they were threats thinly veiled in legalese. Christopher's final voicemail was short and venomous. "Whatever you think you're doing, Rebecca, it won't work. We own this town. We own the judges. You're going to regret this." Rebecca saved the message and forwarded it to Agent Miller. Monday morning, 2 weeks after Rebecca first found the vault, the Whitmores made their move. Rebecca was at the Hawthorne house supervising as FBI technicians carefully removed the paintings for transportation to a secure federal facility. Her phone rang the burner this time. Blake's voice was urgent. "They're coming. Now." Christopher and Pamela with a bulldozer. They got an emergency order from a county commissioner claiming the property is condemned and needs immediate demolition. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs. How? Bribe the commissioner? I'm sure of it. Miller's on his way with backup, but he's 20 minutes out. Can you stall them? Rebecca looked around at the FBI agents packing priceless artifacts into protective cases at the vault door, standing open at everything they'd worked for, hanging in the balance. "I'll stall them." She ran outside just as a silver Mercedes and a black Range Rover pulled into the driveway, followed by a massive yellow bulldozer that rumbled and growled like a mechanical beast. Rebecca's children weren't with her. Thank God they were at Shirley's house, safe and unaware. But Shirley herself stood at the property line, arms crossed, watching with the stern disapproval of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize injustice when she saw it. Christopher climbed out of the Range Rover, wearing a tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than Rebecca's car. Pamela emerged from the Mercedes in designer sunglasses despite the overcast sky, her diamond bracelet catching what little light filtered through the clouds. Rebecca stood on the porch, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was acutely aware of how she must look. Jeans torn at the knee, an old sweater with a stain on the sleeve, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Everything about her screamed poverty, while everything about them screamed power. Christopher's voice carried across the overgrown yard, loud and mocking. "Morning, garbage girl. Change of plans. Pamela and I had our lawyers review Great-Aunt Kathleen's will. Turns out there's a municipal clause regarding hazardous properties. Since you haven't brought the house up to code, the city is seizing it. But out of the goodness of our hearts, we bought the land rights from the county this morning." Pamela removed her sunglasses, her smile sharp as a blade. "We brought the demolition crew, Rebecca. You have exactly 1 hour to get your little toolbox and your filthy clothes out of there before we flatten this eyesore. I told you I'd put townhomes here." Rebecca descended the porch steps, her legs steadier than she'd expected. The terror was still there, coiling in her stomach, but underneath it ran something else, a cold, focused anger that had been building for 2 years. For her entire life, really, every time they'd looked through her instead of at her. Every family gathering where she was forgotten, every Christmas card that never came. Her voice came out calm, almost serene. "You didn't buy the land rights, Christopher." His smirk faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Excuse me? You bribed Commissioner Thomas Caldwell $50,000 to issue an emergency demolition order. The check cleared from your personal account yesterday at 2:14 p.m. It's standard Whitmore protocol, isn't it? When you can't buy something legally, you buy the person who can make it legal." Christopher's face went pale. Pamela's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's a serious accusation. I hope you have proof." Rebecca pulled out her phone, the regular one, not the burner. "You can't demolish this house because as of midnight, Friday 42, Hawthorne Lane has been classified as an active federal crime scene and a protected historical site." Pamela let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "A historical site for what, the world's largest collection of cat urine and mothballs? Are you having a psychotic break, Rebecca?" The sound of sirens cut through the morning air. 4 black SUVs with tinted windows tore up the gravel driveway, fishtailing slightly, before boxing in Christopher's Range Rover and the bulldozer. The doors flew open, and a dozen agents wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI Art Crime Team poured out. Christopher took a step backward, the color draining from his face completely. "What the hell is this? Who authorized this?" Agent Miller stepped out of the lead vehicle, his badge catching the light. "Christopher Whitmore, Pamela Whitmore, step away from the heavy machinery. There's been a development in an ongoing federal investigation." Pamela clutched her handbag like it might shield her from reality. "There's been a mistake. This is private property. We are the Whitmores. We have rights." Miller's expression was carved from ice. "We know exactly who you are, Ms. Whitmore. That's why we're here." He turned to Rebecca. "Ms. Harris, did you locate the ledger we discussed?" Rebecca pulled the leather-bound book from her canvas bag, the weight of it familiar now after days of documentation. "Right here, Agent Miller, along with the Raphael the Fabergé egg and approximately 400 pounds of stolen bullion." Christopher's jaw dropped. "Vault gold. What are you talking about?" Rebecca turned to look at her cousin, at the arrogance that had defined his entire existence, rapidly melting into sheer panic. "Aunt Kathleen left me the house and its physical contents, Christopher. You thought she was a crazy hoarder. She was actually an Allied operative, hiding great-grandfather Richard's treason." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Treason!" Pamela shrieked, the sound high and desperate. "Treason! Richard built Whitmore Logistics from nothing. He was a war hero." Rebecca's voice rang with unwavering authority, every word falling like a hammer blow. Richard Bennett built his empire by laundering stolen Nazi assets. The ledger details every transaction: gold stolen from European national banks, art stripped from Jewish families before they were murdered, jewelry torn from women and children at concentration camps. Every dime of Whitmore money is built on blood. Miller gestured to his agents. The federal government has frozen all Whitmore corporate accounts. Your stock shares, your Manhattan penthouse, your Cayman offshore funds, they're all suspended pending a massive investigation into historical money laundering and possession of stolen cultural property. Christopher lunged forward, fists clenched. You're lying! Two federal agents intercepted him immediately, slamming him against the hood of his own luxury vehicle with practiced efficiency. Metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. You can't do this. Do you know who my lawyers are? Miller's voice was dry, almost bored. Your lawyers just dropped you, Mr. Whitmore. Nobody wants to defend a trust fund built on war crimes. An agent took Pamela gently but firmly by the arm. She wasn't in handcuffs yet, but the message was clear. Pamela collapsed against the side of her Mercedes, weeping hysterically, mascara streaking down her carefully made-up face. Rebecca stood in the overgrown yard, watching as the family that had discarded her, mocked her, tried to destroy her, was systematically dismantled. She waited for the satisfaction to come, the victory, the sense of justice served. Instead, she felt hollow, empty, like she'd won a battle but lost something she couldn't name. Shirley Morrison appeared at her elbow, the old woman's weathered hand finding Rebecca's. You did the right thing, dear. Rebecca wasn't sure anymore. The aftermath wasn't clean. Miller had warned her it wouldn't be, but Rebecca hadn't truly understood what that meant until she lived it. The Whitmores hired a legal team that cost $700 an hour per lawyer, and they fielded 6 of them. Within 48 hours, they'd filed motions challenging the FBI's authority, questioning the validity of Kathleen's will, demanding independent verification of the vault's contents. They argued that Rebecca had coerced a mentally ill elderly woman into changing her inheritance. They produced a psychiatrist who'd never met Kathleen but was willing to testify she likely suffered from dementia. Rebecca couldn't afford a lawyer at all. The FBI provided some legal support, but they were focused on the criminal case, not the civil dispute over property rights. She was drowning in paperwork, court filings, motions she didn't understand. Agent Miller recommended a lawyer named Patricia Brennan, a public defender who sometimes took pro bono cases. Patricia was 53, tired-eyed, and blunt, to the point of rudeness. The Whitmores will drag this out for months, Patricia told Rebecca in their first meeting, held in a coffee shop because Patricia couldn't afford office space. They'll try to bankrupt you through legal fees, force you to settle. Can you hold out? Rebecca looked at her phone. 3 missed calls from the bank, 7 from creditors. Her account balance $23.16. I don't have a choice. 2 months passed, the worst 2 months of Rebecca's life, and that included the year her mother died. The vault was sealed by federal order. The house was padlocked. Rebecca couldn't sell it, couldn't even enter it without FBI escort. Her freelance work dried up. Clients didn't want to be associated with someone embroiled in a federal case, no matter how righteous. The apartment landlord filed eviction papers. Shirley Morrison offered to let Rebecca and the kids move in with her, cramming 5 people into a 2-bedroom house built in 1952. Rebecca accepted because the alternative was homelessness. Emily stopped drawing pictures. Jacob stopped asking questions. Ryan cried himself to sleep most nights, asking when they could go home to their real house, the little apartment he barely remembered anymore. Rebecca lay awake on Shirley's couch at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Kathleen's letter was in her pocket always. She'd read it so many times, the creases were wearing through the paper. You are stronger than they ever gave you credit for. You are braver than you know. Some nights Rebecca believed it. Most nights she felt like a fraud, a woman who'd gotten in over her head and dragged her children down with her. The Whitmores attacked her character in court filings and in whispered conversations that made their way back to Rebecca through Shirley's network of elderly neighbors who still believed in gossip as currency. Rebecca was mentally unstable. Rebecca was a gold digger. Rebecca had always been jealous of the successful branch of the family. Christopher gave an interview to a local business magazine, portraying himself as a victim of false accusations. My great-grandfather built this company through hard work and innovation. These baseless claims are an attempt to tear down a family legacy that took 3 generations to build. The article made Rebecca physically sick. She vomited into Shirley's toilet, heaving until there was nothing left, while Emily knocked softly on the bathroom door, asking if Mommy was okay. The only brightness in those 2 months came from an unexpected source. Margaret Sullivan arrived on a cold October afternoon, a small woman in her late 60s with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. Agent Miller had asked her to come to identify some of the pieces in the vault. She was a Holocaust survivor, one of the last living members of a family that had once been prominent in Warsaw. Rebecca met her at the Hawthorne House FBI agents present to escort them into the vault. Margaret moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but her spine was straight and her gaze was clear. When they showed her the Raphael painting, Margaret's hands trembled. She reached out, not quite touching the canvas, her fingers hovering an inch from the surface. My grandmother's favorite. Her voice was barely a whisper. It hung in our drawing room in Warsaw. I was 8 years old the last time I saw it. The Nazis came on a Tuesday morning. They took everything. The paintings, the silver, my grandmother's jewelry. Then they took us. Rebecca stood beside her, throat tight. Your grandmother, dead in Auschwitz, 3 months after they took her. Margaret's tears fell silently, carving tracks through powder and foundation. My mother, my father, my 2 brothers, all of them. I survived because a stranger hid me in a root cellar for 2 years. She turned to Rebecca, and in her eyes was something Rebecca recognized, grief that had fossilized into purpose. The FBI told me what you're doing, returning these pieces to their rightful owners, to museums, to survivors like me who thought we'd lost everything forever. Rebecca's own tears came unbidden. I'm just doing what my aunt asked. Margaret gripped Rebecca's hand with surprising strength. You're doing more than that. You're proving that some people still choose to do the right thing even when it costs them everything. Later that night, Rebecca told her children about Margaret Sullivan. They were eating dinner at Shirley's dining table, macaroni and cheese from a box, carrot sticks water, because Shirley's fridge was broken and couldn't keep juice cold. Emily, 9 years old now and far too solemn, listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Rebecca finished, the little girl asked, Did we do the right thing, Mommy? Rebecca looked at her 3 children, at their second-hand clothes and their brave faces and their resilience that broke her heart every single day. Yes, baby, we did. Jacob, 7, and always practical, had a different question. But we're still poor, right? Yes, we're still poor. Ryan, 5, and achingly young, just wanted to know, will we have our own house again? Rebecca couldn't promise that, couldn't promise anything except that she loved them and she was trying her best. It didn't feel like enough. Most days, it felt like nothing at all. The breakthrough came in the form of Jonathan Whitmore, Pamela's youngest son, the one family member Rebecca had never met. He called the burner phone on a Wednesday night at 11 p.m. Rebecca almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant trouble, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Harris, my name is Jonathan Whitmore. I'm Pamela's son."
I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Rebecca's first instinct was to hang up. A trap. Another legal maneuver.
"I don't think that's a good idea." Jonathan's voice was young, earnest, desperate. "Please, I have information about my mother's bribery of Commissioner Caldwell. Documented proof. Emails, bank transfers, everything. I want to help you." They met at an all-night diner 40 miles outside Portland, far enough that no one would recognize them. Jonathan Whitmore was 28, a junior partner at a corporate law firm, dressed in a suit that cost more than Rebecca's car, but wearing it like a prison uniform. He slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything's on here. Emails between my mother and Caldwell negotiating the price for the demolition order. Bank statements showing the $50,000 transfer. Text messages where Christopher jokes about buying officials like other people buy groceries." Rebecca stared at the USB drive like it might explode.
Why are you doing this?
Jonathan's laugh was bitter. "Because I've spent my entire life watching my family get away with things that would land normal people in prison. Because I became a lawyer to fight for justice, and instead I've been complicit in covering up corruption." He met her eyes, and Rebecca saw genuine anguish there. "I love my mother. I do. But I can't keep pretending this is okay, that any of this is okay." Rebecca picked up the drive with shaking fingers. "She'll never forgive you." "I know." Jonathan's voice cracked. "But maybe I'll be able to forgive myself." He left before his coffee arrived, walking out into the night like a man going to his execution. Rebecca sat alone in the booth, the USB drive heavy in her palm, understanding for the first time that she wasn't the only one this was costing. The leaked documents hit the Boston Globe on a Thursday morning. Rebecca had nothing to do with it. Jonathan must have sent copies to journalists, along with giving her the drive, but the timing was perfect. Or terrible, depending on perspective. Whitmore Empire built on Nazi gold. Federal investigation reveals decades of money laundering. The article was thorough, devastating, backed by documents and FBI confirmation. It detailed Richard Bennett's wartime smuggling operation, the stolen art and gold, now recovered from Rebecca's inherited property, the ongoing federal investigation into the Whitmore family's finances. But it also told Rebecca's story. The single mother who'd inherited what everyone thought was garbage and discovered the crime of the century, the woman who chose to return stolen treasures instead of keeping them for herself. Within hours, the story was picked up by the Associated Press. By evening, it was trending on social media. By the next morning, Rebecca's phone, her regular phone, was flooded with calls from reporters, victims' advocacy groups, and strangers who wanted to tell her she was brave. Someone set up a GoFundMe. Donations poured in from people Rebecca would never meet, people who saw in her story something they needed to believe, in proof that doing the right thing still mattered. By the end of the week, the fund held $73,000. It wasn't wealth, it wasn't security, but it was enough to hire Patricia Brennan full-time, enough to pay rent on a small apartment, enough to buy Emily new shoes, and Jacob that field trip permission slip, and Ryan a sewing kit to fix his rabbit's ear properly. The public pressure changed everything. Whitmore Logistics' stock price collapsed as shareholders fled. Corporate clients canceled contracts. The board of directors demanded Pamela's resignation. Christopher, already facing federal charges for the bribery scheme, saw his bail revoked after the article revealed he'd attempted to destroy evidence. He was remanded to federal custody. Pamela called Rebecca one final time, her voice destroyed by crying. "You've ruined us! Everything we built! Everything Richard worked for! How does it feel to destroy your own family?" Rebecca thought about Margaret Sullivan's grandmother murdered in Auschwitz, about James Morrison killed by smugglers in Prague, about Kathleen spending 40 years buried in garbage to guard the truth. "You were never my family, Pamela. Family doesn't leave you to drown." She hung up and blocked the number. That night, Rebecca sat on Shirley's couch with her 3 children piled around her. Emily was reading a new library book. Jacob was building something complex with Legos. Ryan was finally asleep, his repaired rabbit clutched to his chest. The burner phone buzzed.
A text from Agent Miller. Court date set for December 15th. We have everything we need. You're going to win this.
Rebecca wasn't sure what winning looked like anymore. The Whitmores were destroyed, but so was she in different ways. The treasures would be returned to their rightful owners, but 3 children were sleeping in a stranger's house because their mother had chosen justice over security. Emily looked up from her book, those 2 old eyes studying Rebecca's face. "You're thinking hard thoughts again. Just wondering if we did the right thing." Her daughter, 9 years old, wise beyond measure, resilient in ways that broke Rebecca's heart, didn't hesitate. "We did, Mommy, because now other people get their stuff back, the people it was stolen from." From the mouths of children came the clearest truth. Sometimes the cost of doing right was everything you had, and you paid it anyway and hoped it was enough. Rebecca pulled Emily closer, kissed the top of her head, and chose to believe her daughter was right. The Portland County Courthouse was built in 1923, all marble columns and vaulted ceilings, designed to make ordinary people feel small. Rebecca walked through the metal detectors on December 15th, wearing her only suit, purchased second-hand 3 days earlier, with money from the GoFundMe navy blue and slightly too large in the shoulders. Emily, Jacob, and Ryan were with Shirley, spared from witnessing what was about to unfold. Patricia Brennan met Rebecca in the hallway outside courtroom 4C, carrying a battered briefcase that had seen better decades. The Whitmores brought in Marcus Sheffield. He's the kind of lawyer who charges by the syllable and wins cases he shouldn't. Don't let him rattle you. The courtroom filled quickly. Journalists packed the gallery, cameras prohibited, but notebooks poised. Rebecca spotted faces she recognized from news coverage. Legal analysts, art historians, a rabbi from the local synagogue who'd written an op-ed about the case. Christopher and Pamela sat at the defense table with their legal team's 6 lawyers in matching dark suits arranged like chess pieces. Christopher wore an ankle monitor, his bail conditions modified after Jonathan's leak. He looked thinner, older, the arrogance burned away, leaving only bitterness. Pamela sat rigid, her designer clothes immaculate, but her hands shook when she reached for her water glass. Jonathan Whitmore sat alone in the back row, as far from his mother as the room allowed. Their eyes never met. Judge Catherine Holland entered, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and a reputation for being unswayed by wealth or status. She'd presided over 3 major corruption cases in the past decade, sending 2 state senators and a police chief to prison. Rebecca took that as a good sign. Marcus Sheffield stood, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon. Your Honor, this case represents a troubling precedent. My clients are victims of a vendetta orchestrated by a distant relative who has manufactured evidence to support wild accusations against a respected family. Rebecca Harris inherited a property and, finding it worthless, concocted an elaborate scheme to extort money from the Whitmores. Patricia rose, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. We have documented proof spanning 8 decades. Bank records, shipping manifests, testimony from federal agents, Holocaust survivors, and historical experts. The defense's attempt to paint this as a personal vendetta falls apart under the weight of documented fact. Holland's expression gave nothing away. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. Proceed with your case, Ms. Brennan. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in prosecutorial precision. Patricia called Agent Miller first. He walked the court through the vault discovery, the cataloging of stolen artifacts, the authentication process performed by experts from the Smithsonian and the FBI's art crime team. He presented photographs of each gold bar, each painting the ledger with Richard Bennett's handwriting, verified by 3 independent forensic document examiners. Sheffield cross-examined aggressively, trying to suggest the ledger could be a forgery, that the artifacts might have been legally acquired. Miller's responses were calm, factual, devastating. The Raphael painting was documented as stolen from the Czartoryski Museum in 1939. It appears on every major database of Nazi-looted art. The gold bars bear stamps from the Hungarian National Bank and were reported missing in 1944. These items were not legally acquired, they were plundered. Patricia called Kenneth Blake next. He took the stand looking like exactly what he was, a retired cop who'd spent 30 years chasing truth through bureaucratic mazes. His testimony established Kathleen's background with the OSS, verified through declassified military records Patricia had obtained from the National Archives. Sheffield tried to discredit him. Mr. Blake, isn't it true you were forced into early retirement after a questionable investigation into a city council member? Blake's smile was thin and dangerous. I was forced into retirement because I proved that council member was taking bribes from construction companies. He went to prison. I went fishing. I sleep fine at night. Scattered laughter rippled through the gallery. Holland's gavel silenced it, but Rebecca caught the faintest hint of approval in the judge's eyes. The afternoon session brought Margaret Sullivan. She walked to the stand, slowly leaning on her cane, and when she was sworn in, her voice was steady despite her age. Patricia's questions were gentle, respectful. Ms. Sullivan, can you describe what happened to your family in 1942? Margaret's testimony was clinical at first, a recitation of facts she'd probably told 1,000 times. The Nazis arrived in Warsaw on March 15th. They confiscated the family's property, the house, the business, the art collection. They wore uniforms and carried clipboards and made everything seem official legal, as if theft committed by governments wasn't theft at all. Then Patricia showed her a photograph of the Raphael painting, and Margaret's composure cracked. That hung in our drawing room. I used to stand in front of it before dinner parties, watching the candlelight make the young man's face seem alive. Her voice broke. My grandmother would tell me stories about the artist, about Renaissance Italy. She said art was proof that humans could create beauty even in a world full of ugliness. What happened to your grandmother? Auschwitz, September 1942. She was 63 years old. Margaret looked directly at Pamela Whitmore, her gaze unwavering. Your grandfather bought that painting from the Nazis who murdered my grandmother. He profited from her death, from all their deaths. Pamela looked away first. Sheffield had no questions for Margaret Sullivan. What could he possibly ask that wouldn't make his clients look worse? The bombshell came at 4:30 in the afternoon when Patricia called Jonathan Whitmore to the stand. Pamela's head snapped up, her face going white. Christopher lunged halfway out of his seat before his lawyers pulled him back. The courtroom erupted in whispers until Holland's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Jonathan walked to the stand like a man approaching a gallows. When he placed his hand on the Bible, his fingers trembled, but his voice was clear. Patricia's questions established his credentials: Harvard Law, 3 years at Morrison and Fitch, specialization in corporate litigation. Then she asked, Mr. Whitmore, you're Pamela Whitmore's son. Why are you testifying against your own mother? Jonathan looked at Pamela, and the anguish on his face was raw and terrible. Because she asked me to help her bribe County Commissioner Thomas Caldwell to issue a fraudulent demolition order. Because when I refused my brother, Christopher did it instead. Because I've spent my entire life watching my family break laws that send other people to prison, and I can't do it anymore. Patricia entered the emails into evidence. Pamela to Christopher. We need that property demolished before the FBI finishes their investigation. Talk to Caldwell. He'll play ball for the right price. Christopher's response. Already on it. 50,000 should do it. Caldwell's reply. Make it 60 and I'll have the order signed by Monday. The paper trail was complete, irrefutable. Bank transfers matching the exact amounts. Text messages joking about buying officials. A recorded phone call where Pamela outlined the entire scheme, apparently unaware her son was documenting everything. Sheffield tried to salvage the wreckage. Mr. Whitmore, isn't it true you've had disagreements with your mother about your career choices, that you resented her pressure to join the family business? Jonathan's response was quiet but steady. I resent that she taught me to value money over morality. I resent that she believes laws are suggestions for people like us. But this testimony isn't about resentment. It's about telling the truth, even when it destroys everything I thought I knew about my family. Pamela stood up, her voice cracking. How could you? I'm your mother. Holland's gavel struck 3 times. Ms. Whitmore, sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt. Pamela collapsed back into her chair, weeping into her hands, while her lawyers tried to comfort her. Christopher stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight Rebecca could see the muscles jumping. Jonathan stepped down from the witness stand and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than all the shouting. Judge Holland called a 15-minute recess. Rebecca found herself in the hallway, legs shaking, barely able to process what had just happened. Patricia appeared beside her with a bottle of water. "We won. You know that, right? There's no recovering from this." Rebecca took the water, but couldn't drink it. "He just destroyed his entire family for me, for strangers, for people who died 80 years ago." Patricia's expression softened the hard edges of the courtroom warrior, giving way to something more human. "He did it because you showed him it was possible, because watching you choose principle over profit gave him permission to do the same." When court resumed, Sheffield made a final desperate attempt to argue that even if Richard Bennett had acquired the items illegally, the statute of limitations had long expired, that his clients had no knowledge of any wrongdoing, that they were innocent inheritors of a complicated legacy. Patricia's rebuttal was surgical. Possession of stolen property doesn't become legal just because time passes. These items are not commodities. They are cultural heritage, personal treasures, evidence of genocide. The Whitmores have known for years, their own ledger proves it, exactly where their wealth originated. They chose to benefit from it anyway. Holland took 2 days to render her verdict. Rebecca spent those 48 hours in a fog, going through the motions of motherhood, making breakfast, reading bedtime stories, answering Emily's careful questions with half-truths designed to protect her from the full weight of what was happening. On December 17th, the courthouse filled again. Holland took the bench at 9 a.m. sharp, her written decision running to 43 pages. The summary was enough. "The evidence presented demonstrates beyond reasonable doubt that Richard Bennett engaged in systematic theft and trafficking of items stolen by Nazi forces during World War II. The Whitmore family, through their continued possession and concealment of these items and their attempts to destroy evidence through bribery and intimidation, has perpetuated these crimes into the present day. Therefore, this court rules that all assets derived from the transactions detailed in the ledger of Richard Bennett, dated 1943 through 1967, are subject to immediate seizure and forfeiture. The property at 42 Hawthorne Lane, including all contents therein, is hereby confirmed as the legal property of Rebecca Harris, to be administered in accordance with federal repatriation guidelines." Pamela Whitmore sobbed openly. Christopher's face was stone. Their lawyers gathered papers with the resigned efficiency of people who'd already moved on to their next case. Holland continued, "Furthermore, Christopher Whitmore and Pamela Whitmore are hereby charged with attempted obstruction of justice, bribery of a public official, and conspiracy to destroy evidence. Both defendants will surrender their passports immediately and await trial on these charges. The court also orders the Whitmore family to pay all legal fees incurred by Ms. Harris in this matter, totaling $147,000. The gavel fell with finality. Rebecca walked out of the courthouse into December sunlight that felt too bright, too clear. Patricia hugged her. "Kenneth." Blake shook her hand. Agent Miller promised to be in touch about the repatriation process. Journalists shouted questions. Rebecca didn't answer. She drove to Shirley's house in silence, her mind blank and buzzing simultaneously. When she opened the door, 3 children rushed at her, and Rebecca dropped to her knees to gather them in her arms. Emily pulled back first, studying her mother's face with those old soul eyes. "Did you win?" Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Jacob whooped with joy. Ryan asked if they could have pizza to celebrate, and Rebecca, for the first time in months, laughed until tears streamed down her face, until her children were laughing too. Not understanding why, but joining in anyway, because joy, like grief, was contagious. The financial resolution took another 3 months to untangle. The FBI's art crime team worked with international repatriation committees identifying the rightful owners or their descendants for each stolen piece. The Raphael went back to the Czartoryski Museum in Poland. The Fabergé egg was claimed by the descendants of its original Russian owner, who donated it to a museum in St. Petersburg. Other pieces, 37 paintings, 62 sculptures, innumerable smaller artifacts, found their way home through similar channels. The gold was a more complex matter. Without living heirs to the Hungarian and Polish families, it had been stolen from the bars, were sold at auction, with proceeds split between Holocaust survivor organizations and a victims' compensation fund. Rebecca's finder's fee, calculated as 15% of the recovered value, came to be $8.2 million. Agent Miller delivered the news in person, sitting at Shirley's kitchen table with paperwork that looked more complicated than tax returns. The check will clear in about a week. You'll want to hire a financial advisor. This kind of money requires careful management. $8 million. Rebecca stared at the number until it stopped looking like numbers and started looking like abstract symbols. More money than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes of freelance graphic design. Enough to never worry about rent or groceries or medical bills again. That night, lying on Shirley's couch while her children slept in the bedroom, Rebecca made a list on the back of an envelope. Pay off mother's medical debt, $127,000. College funds for Emily, Jacob Ryan, $2 million. Buy a house. Nothing fancy, $450,000. Emergency fund, $500,000. Hire financial advisor, $, the rest, the rest. That was the question that kept her awake. Kathleen's letter echoed in her memory. Use the truth to take back your life. 3 days later, Rebecca placed a call to Kenneth Blake. I want to turn the Hawthorne House into a museum, a memorial to Kathleen and to everyone who fought against what Richard Bennett represented. Silence on the other end, then Blake's gravel-rough laugh. Kathleen would have liked that. Hell, she probably planned for it. The Kathleen Bennett Memorial Museum opened 14 months later, on a crisp October afternoon when the Maine leaves were at their peak and the air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. The Victorian mansion had been restored to its bones, but modernized where it mattered. The roof was new, the plumbing functional, the electrical system brought up to code. The ground floor rooms housed exhibits about the OSS, about Nazi art theft, about the individuals who'd risked everything to preserve culture in the face of destruction. But the centerpiece was the vault itself, kept exactly as Rebecca had found it. Visitors descended through the library, the false bookcase now permanently open, revealing the steel door behind it, and entered the climate-controlled bunker where replicas of the stolen items sat on their original easels and shelves. The real artifacts were home now, but photographs and detailed descriptions told their stories. The ledger sat under bulletproof glass, open to the page, documenting the Weiss family's jewelry. Emily, now 10 years old, had helped design the children's education section. Jacob, at 8, had insisted on an interactive exhibit where kids could try to solve the mystery of the missing 5 feet before learning about the vault. Ryan, 6, and proud, had contributed drawings that now hung in the entrance hall stick figures of their family, standing in front of the big house, a dog that Rebecca had finally agreed they could get once they moved into their new home. Margaret Sullivan cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony, her hand steadier now, her voice strong. This museum is proof that some people still believe truth matters more than comfort, that justice delayed is not justice denied, that the victims of history deserve to be remembered by name, not reduced to statistics. The crowd, 200 people, including journalists, historians, survivors, and local politicians, applauded. Rebecca stood at the back with her children, uncomfortable with the attention, but unable to escape it. This was her legacy now, whether she wanted it or not. Kenneth Blake appeared at her elbow, looking uncomfortable in a suit and tie. Kathleen's smiling somewhere. This is exactly what she hoped for. Rebecca thought about the old woman she'd known only through birthday cards and one final letter. I wish I could have thanked her. You just did. Blake gestured at the building, the crowds, the banner reading, Kathleen Bennett, Guardian of History. This is the thank you she wanted. The museum attracted 45,000 visitors in its first year. School groups came to learn about the Holocaust and art theft and the individuals who fought back. Survivors came to tell their stories. Journalists came to document this unprecedented example of someone choosing restitution over profit. Rebecca hired a staff of 12 curators, educators, security personnel, a bookkeeper who made sure every donation dollar was tracked and spent appropriately. She served as director, a role she'd never imagined for herself, giving occasional tours and speeches that terrified her but got easier each time. The Whitmores, meanwhile, crumbled. Christopher was convicted of bribery and obstruction, sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. Pamela pleaded guilty to lesser charges, received probation and community service, but lost everything else. The family business collapsed within 6 months of the verdict, creditors picking apart the carcass. The Manhattan penthouse sold at auction. The offshore accounts were seized and distributed to victims' funds. Jonathan Whitmore moved to Seattle, joined a nonprofit law firm defending immigrants, and changed his name to Jonathan Morrison, taking the surname of the OSS captain who died in Prague. He sent Rebecca a Christmas card that first year. Thank you for showing me it was possible to start over. She kept the card in Kathleen's letter, 2 pieces of paper that weighed almost nothing but meant everything. The confrontation Rebecca had been dreading finally came on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 16 months after the verdict. Rebecca was at the museum reviewing budget reports in her small office when the receptionist buzzed. There's a Pamela Whitmore here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. Rebecca's stomach clenched. Send her in. Pamela entered looking like a shadow of her former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a plain sweater and jeans. No jewelry except a simple watch. Her hair, once professionally styled, was pulled back in a ponytail going gray at the roots. She looked older, smaller, diminished. She stood in the doorway, not entering fully, as if waiting for permission. Rebecca gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit. Pamela sat, her purse clutched in her lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Pamela's voice emerged barely above a whisper. I came to see what you built, and it's beautiful, important, everything a museum should be. Pamela's hands twisted the purse strap. I walked through every exhibit. I read about the families we... She choked on the words. The families Richard destroyed. I saw their names, their faces, the children. Rebecca waited. I didn't know. Pamela looked up, and her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. That sounds like an excuse. It is an excuse. But, Rebecca, I genuinely didn't know. Richard died when I was 7 years old. My father told me stories about his brilliant business mind, his work ethic, his patriotism. Nobody ever mentioned where the money actually came from. When did you find out? College. I found a box in my father's study letters between Richard and some Swiss banker. Coded language, but obvious if you were paying attention. Talking about merchandise and expedited shipping and European acquisitions. Pamela's voice cracked. I convinced myself it didn't matter. That was so long ago, that we'd built legitimate businesses on top of that foundation, that I wasn't responsible for what my grandfather did. Rebecca thought about all the nights she'd lain awake, wondering if she was too harsh, too unforgiving, too willing to destroy a family for sins committed before they were born. You knew, and you built your life on top of it anyway. Yes, the word came out flat, defeated. I knew, and I buried it, and I raised my children to believe they deserved everything they had, that we were special, better. Pamela's tears fell silently now. Christopher learned that lesson too well. Jonathan was always different. He asked questions I didn't want to answer. And when you exposed the truth, when he chose your side over mine, I hated you both for taking away my comfortable lie. Rebecca's anger, so sharp and hot for so long, had cooled into something harder and sadder. Why are you here, Pamela? To apologize. To tell you I'm sorry for how we treated you, for the things Christopher said, for trying to destroy what Kathleen left you. Pamela wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture so ordinary it made her seem human for the first time. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that I understand now what we were, what I was. Rebecca looked at this broken woman sitting across from her, this person who'd driven a Mercedes and worn diamonds and called her garbage girl, now reduced to someone who couldn't afford her own hairstylist. Part of Rebecca wanted to feel triumphant. Another part just felt tired. Pamela, the truth is, I don't think about you anymore. I don't hate you. I don't forgive you. I just exist in a different space now where you're not relevant. The words hit Pamela but like physical blows, her face crumpling. That's worse than hatred. Maybe, but it's honest. Rebecca stood signaling the conversation was ending. Thank you for coming. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. Pamela stood too, shoulders hunched, purse clutched like armor. At the door, she paused. Your children, I saw them in the entrance hall in the drawings. They look happy. They are. I'm glad. Pamela's smile was broken but genuine. That's more than my children can say. She left, and Rebecca watched through the window as Pamela crossed the parking lot to a 10-year-old Toyota, climbed in, and drove away. The car disappeared down the tree-lined street, and Rebecca felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the release of carrying someone else's shame. 3 years after finding the vault, Rebecca's life had settled into something resembling normalcy, though normal now meant things that would have seemed impossible during those desperate freelance days. She and the children lived in a 4-bedroom house in Portland's West End, nothing ostentatious but comfortable. A backyard where Ryan's promised dog, a rescue mutt named Captain, could run. A kitchen where Emily liked to experiment with baking recipes, a garage where Jacob built increasingly elaborate Lego structures. The museum had grown, expanding into the carriage house behind the main property, adding rotating exhibits, hosting lectures, and educational programs. Kenneth Blake had passed away 6 months earlier, at age 59, a heart attack taking him quickly while he fished his favorite stream. The museum established the Kenneth Blake Fellowship for investigative journalists pursuing stories about historical injustice. Rebecca still missed his gravel voice and cynical wisdom. Margaret Sullivan visited quarterly, each time a little slower, but no less sharp. She'd become the museum's most popular speaker, her testimony about surviving the Warsaw Ghetto drawing crowds that spilled into the hallways. Emily, now 13 and tall, as her mother, always made sure to attend Margaret's talks, taking notes that she'd transcribe later for the museum archives. Jonathan Whitmore sent an email once a month, updates about his work in Seattle, occasional questions about the museum, carefully neutral messages that never mentioned his mother or brother. Rebecca always responded short and friendly. They'd never met in person since the trial, but some relationships existed better at a distance. Christopher was released from federal prison after serving 20 months. He moved to Florida, worked construction, kept his head down. Rebecca heard about him through news alerts she'd set up and never quite removed. He married someone he met at an AA meeting. Recovery apparently had been part of his sentence, and they had a baby. Rebecca felt nothing about this information. It simply was. On a Saturday morning in late September, Rebecca found herself at the museum alone, the staff given the day off for a local holiday. She walked through the exhibits, straightening placards, adjusting lights, performing the small maintenance tasks that centered her. In the vault, the real vault, still maintained exactly as she'd found it, Rebecca stood looking at the empty easels where priceless paintings had once rested. The space felt sacred now, a tomb turned temple. Names were etched on the walls, added year by year as researchers identified more victims whose possessions had passed through Richard Bennett's hands. Over 300 names so far, whole families, whole worlds. Rebecca opened the small safe she'd had installed in the corner, accessible only to her, and removed Kathleen's letter. The paper was fragile now, the ink fading, the creases threatening to tear. She'd had it professionally preserved, sealed between archival sheets, stored in climate-controlled darkness, but she still took it out sometimes, reading the words that had changed everything. At the bottom of the safe was another envelope, this one newer, addressed in Kathleen's handwriting, but with a note from the lawyer, to be delivered to Rebecca Harris 3 years after the vault is opened. Agent Miller had found it during the final evidence sweep, tucked behind a loose brick in the vault wall. He'd held it for the required 3 years, delivering it exactly on schedule last month. Rebecca had been afraid to open it, worried it would change things, add new burdens, demand more sacrifice. But this morning, standing in the empty vault with autumn light filtering through the library windows above, she broke the seal. The letter was short, Kathleen's handwriting shakier than the first, suggesting it had been written near the end. Dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then 3 years have passed. You've made your choices, built something or destroyed something, or perhaps both. I don't know what path you chose. I only know I gave you the option, which is more than anyone gave me. By now, you've learned that doing the right thing doesn't feel how you expect. It doesn't come with trumpets and glory. Mostly, it comes with exhaustion and doubt, and wondering if the cost was worth it. Here's what I learned in 40 years of guarding secrets: the cost is always worth it. Not because you get something in return, but because you get to live with yourself afterward. You were 5 years old the last time I saw you. Your mother brought you to the Hawthorne house for Christmas. You were fascinated by the bookcase in the library, running your tiny hands over the carved roots, asking why they looked like snakes. I told you they were tree roots reaching down to find water, and you said they look strong. I knew then you were the one, not because you were special or chosen, but because you understood instinctively that strength comes from going deep, from finding the source, from pulling at roots even when it's hard. Thank you for being exactly who I hoped you'd be. Your story isn't over, Rebecca. Neither is mine, as long as you keep telling it. With eternal gratitude, Kathleen. Rebecca folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, returned it to the safe. She closed the vault door behind her, spun the lock, pulled the carved root that activated the bookcase mechanism. The mahogany shelves swung closed, hiding the steel behind Victorian respectability. Upstairs, sunlight streamed through clean windows. The house no longer smelled of decay and secrets. It smelled of floor polish and fresh paint and the coffee Rebecca had brewed in the small staff kitchen. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Movie tonight. Jacob wants to see the new superhero thing. Ryan says, only if we get popcorn. Rebecca smiled, typing back. Deal. Home by 5. Another text, this one from the museum's education coordinator, just confirmed Boston Public Schools wants to bring 300 students next month. Huge waiting list. Rebecca responded with a thumbs up, already thinking about logistics, staffing the grant application that would fund transportation costs for students from low-income districts. She walked out onto the porch, looking at the yard she'd once hauled trash across, now landscaped with native plants, and a memorial garden where stones bore the names of OSS operatives who had died fighting art theft during the war. James Morrison's name was there, along with 12 others. A car pulled into the parking lot, a family with 2 kids consulting a map on their phone, looking up at the house with curiosity and excitement. The museum wouldn't officially open for another 2 hours, but Rebecca walked down to greet them anyway. We're a little early. The father looked embarrassed. We drove up from Boston, didn't time it right. Rebecca pulled keys from her pocket. Come on in. I'll give you a private tour. The children's faces lit up, and Rebecca found herself smiling as she unlocked the front door, stepping aside to let them enter. This was what Kathleen had given her, not wealth or fame or revenge, but purpose. The ability to transform pain into education, secrets into stories stolen, treasures into returned heritage. Some days, Rebecca still woke up exhausted, still questioned whether it had been worth it. It still carried the weight of knowing she'd destroyed a family to save strangers. But then she'd walk through the museum and see a child's face change when they learned about the Raphael painting's journey home. Or she'd receive an email from a researcher who'd found closure tracking their family's lost artifacts. Or she'd watch Emily helping younger visitors with the interactive exhibits, teaching them what her mother had taught her, that doing right was harder than doing nothing, but it was the only choice that let you sleep at night. The family from Boston followed Rebecca into the foyer, their kids immediately drawn to Ryan's stick-figure drawings, laughing at Captain the dog's oversized ears and Emily's perfectly rendered smile. Your daughter drew these? The mother asked. My son, actually. He's 6. Rebecca pointed to the signature in the corner, Ryan Harris, age 6. I love this house. The woman smiled. You must be very proud. Rebecca thought about 3 children sleeping on Shirley Morrison's couch, about choosing between electricity and groceries, about the moment she'd pulled that carved root and changed everything. I am, of all of them. She led the family deeper into the house, into the library, where the bookcase stood closed, and she told them the story of a woman who'd lived 40 years as a punchline to protect a truth too important to let die. The children listened with wide eyes, asking questions. Rebecca answered patiently, guiding them toward the moment of discovery, letting them experience the shock and wonder of learning that walls can hide worlds and garbage can camouflage gold. When the tour ended 90 minutes later, the family left donations in the box, by the door money that would fund scholarships and research and the slow, patient work of returning history to the people it belonged to. Rebecca locked the door behind them and stood alone in the foyer, surrounded by photographs of people who died, believing their heritage was lost forever. People who'd never know that decades later, a broke single mother with 3 kids and $89 in her checking account would choose their stories over her own comfort. But Rebecca knew, Kathleen knew, and in the end, that had to be enough. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. 3 hours until she had to pick up the kids. Enough time to finish the grant application, respond to emails, maybe even eat lunch if she remembered. Or maybe she'd just sit here for a few minutes more in the house that everyone thought was worthless, in the silence that held more voices than most people would ever hear, grateful for the burden of being trusted with the truth. Because that's what inheritance really was, not money or property or things you could touch, but the responsibility to be worthy of someone else's faith in who you might become. Rebecca Harris walked to the library, pulled the carved root, watched the bookcase swing open one more time. She stepped into the vault, turned on the lights, and in the empty space where stolen treasures once hid, she saw what Kathleen had really left, her proof that one person, choosing courage over comfort, could ripple forward through time, changing lives they'd never meet, righting wrongs they'd never witnessed, building futures from the ruins of the past. It was enough. It had always been enough. It would always be enough.